Plenty to take away from the Bucs' first preseason game, but first things first, and that's the battle between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this reaction episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Buccaneers as the deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. We are here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers who we want to share our appreciation for your continued support of the show. I know I just said Monday through Friday. Today's Friday's episode, but what sense did it make to drop a Friday episode where they played a game Friday night? We don't want to react to that. So we're dropping it on Saturday instead. And we are doing so thanks to our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free on linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Lots of good and bad to take away from the Bucs' preseason loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's going to come up in a little bit. First, we have to start with the quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, of course, got the start for the Buccaneers. We knew that going in, and he played pretty well overall. Finished 8 of 9 for 63 yards and a touchdown. Was not sacked. Did not turn the ball over. And that touchdown pass, it was a phenomenal pass to Trey Palmer in the back of the end zone. It was perfectly placed over the leaping, outstretched arms of the Pittsburgh defender. And it was an even more incredible job by Trey Palmer, who was fighting for a job on this football team, trying to make that cut to the 53-man roster. Perfect foot placement in the back of the end zone. He towed the line, makes the catch. That ended up tying the game at 7. A couple of other moments for Baker Mayfield that really shined. He had a great pass to Geiger on 2nd and 21 for a gain of 20. That set up a 3rd and short. They were able to extend the drive. He had another pass to Trey Palmer for 20 plus yards. That ended up getting called back for offensive pass interference, but it seemed overall that Baker Mayfield really had a grasp and a command of the offense. He was checking into things. He was pointing out blocking schemes and coverages. He really had a good feel for the game, for Canales' offense, and it showed. It translated to the field. I realized that initial drive was a little bit tough. They went 3 and out. They were going for it on 4th down, which you guys heard me on our preview episode say, in those situations, I want to see them go for it. I want to see them be aggressive and go for 4th downs to try out these situations. Looked like they were going to convert. Unfortunately, a false start by Cody Mauch negated that. We're going to get more into that a little bit later. But he was out there without Tristan Wirfs, without Filer, without Evans and Godwin and Rashad. You know, there were some starting pieces missing. So we didn't get a full sense as to what Baker Mayfield could do. On the flip side, it was kind of the same for Kyle Trask, right? But he didn't really have a great night. Finished 6 of 10 for 99 yards, no touchdowns, was sacked 3 times and threw an interception. So there were lots of struggles by Kyle Trask. And before you go yelling at me in the YouTube comments or on Twitter, not all of these struggles can be placed solely on the shoulders of Kyle Trask. That is 100% true. But he also is not innocent in all of this. For example, that interception that he threw, that was on a 3rd and 19 set up early in the drive due to a penalty. A penalty is what set them back to begin with. Then he has to force the ball down the field. It was a bad pass. It was a bad decision, but they should not have been in that situation to begin with. And that situation was not Kyle Trask's fault. The sacks, one of them, I felt he held the ball too long. Two of them, solely on the offensive line. He had absolutely no time to set his feet and get the ball down the field. Not his fault. It's better that he eats the ball, takes the sack, protects the football than it was for him to try to force the ball out of his hands too early, too quick, which could have resulted in an even worse outcome than just the sacks. So it wasn't a terrible night for Kyle Trask by any means. He just didn't look as commanding or as sharp as Baker Mayfield. Again, not all on him. His very first pass was an absolute laser to David Moore for 20 yards. And it was a beautiful read, a beautiful pass, great timing. That was the Kyle Trask that we've seen throughout training camp so far. That was the Kyle Trask that I was looking forward to seeing play on Friday night. He started, I'm sorry, let's go back a little bit before I talk about the second half. He had an opportunity to run a 2-minute drill. That, again, was not pretty. They go 3 and out. He did take a sack on that, which that one was not really his fault. It was an ugly 2-minute drill. And then, he starts the second half, 3 and out, got sacked on that drive as well. That one was on Luke Gedeke for sure. We're going to talk more about that coming up. But as I said for Baker, it's hard to tell the full grasp and the full mastery of this offense when you're missing some key offensive players. The same can absolutely be said for Kyle Trask. Now, he was out there with mostly the same receivers. Both quarterbacks got their opportunity to work with both Keyshawn Vaughn and Chase Edmonds as their running backs. Both quarterbacks had Robert Hainsey at center. They had Cody Mauch at right guard. They had Luke Gedeke at right tackle. Two very, very different results despite having a lot of the same pieces. But we'll see how things go when they get to play the Jets. I don't know how much playing time they're really going to get, if it's going to look similar to what it did against the Steelers. But as Evan Klosky pointed out on WTSP Wednesday this past week, a lot of the starter time that Trask and Baker are going to get are going to be part of these inter squad practices, the joint practices, the inter squad scrimmages, all of those things. They're going to get a lot of time with the opposing team, the New York Jets, their starting defense. The defense is going to get a lot of time against the Jets starting offense. That's really where you're going to get a lot of that work. So we'll see how that translates to the preseason, how the Jets treat that game, how the Buccaneers treat that game. But we know Kyle Trask is going to get the start against the New York Jets in the second preseason game. But it was pretty close to being an apples to apples comparison on Friday night. Baker comes out ahead in that one. We'll talk more about the quarterback situation. A lot of you know what I'm talking about. For those that are on social media or saw the report, there is some talk about the starter for the season. David and I will be back tomorrow to talk more about that situation because we have more reaction to the preseason game coming up. There was definitely more involved in that game than just the quarterbacks, and that is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's super easy to create a job post on LinkedIn Jobs, and you can do it for free. Then just add your job, the purple hashtag hiring frame, to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. And a special shout out to all of our everydayers who are out there coming to us every Monday through Friday. Plenty of players stood out on Friday night, some for good reasons, others not so much. So we're going to talk about a couple of these guys, and we're going to start with the good. Then we're going to get to the bad. Then we're going to get to what I would like to call the Jekyll and Hyde performer of the day. So the good that we took away from this game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm starting with Devin Tompkins. This guy continues to solidify himself as the wide receiver 4. He's been having a great training camp. He looked really crisp and really sharp against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just 2 receptions on 2 targets. He did have 1 carry for 8 yards, but he continued to look good in the return game. They gave Trey Palmer an opportunity there on kick returns. They gave Geiger an opportunity on punt returns. That didn't go very well. But Devin Tompkins continues to be a player that these quarterbacks appear to trust and is certainly getting a better grasp on the offense. He was all over the place. He took some hard hits, bounced right back up, utilizing that speed, utilizing that quickness. Love to see that from Devin. I'm looking for even more from him against the New York Jets coming up in the next preseason game. Then we're going to talk about Chase Edmonds. David and I have talked quite a bit about who's going to be behind Rachaad White, right? We've talked about Keyshawn Vaughn finally getting his opportunity. Chase Edmonds at this stage in his career is what he is. I have a lot of hopes that Sean Tucker is going to pan out, and I even predicted on our Bold Predictions episode that by week 8, he's going to be the locked and loaded RB2, probably getting about 30 to 40% of the running back snaps, as compared to Rachaad, who's probably going to be in that 45 to 50 range. And then Keyshawn Vaughn and Chase Edmonds splitting what was left of that pie. But Chase Edmonds proved that he is the better of the backs, if you're going to judge this off of 1 preseason game, over Keyshawn Vaughn in this one. He had 6 carries, 18 yards, 1 reception for 4 yards. He just, every aspect of his game Friday night outperformed what Keyshawn Vaughn was doing. And again, they were working with the same quarterbacks. They were working with the same offensive line. Both of these guys got opportunities with Baker and with Kyle Trask. So it was an apples to apples comparison. Chase Edmonds looked quicker, more decisive, more confident, more aware of what was going on around him. Clearly a leg up over Keyshawn Vaughn as the RB2 to start the regular season. KJ Britt on the defensive side of the football was fantastic. He was all over the field. Great pursuit, finished with 4 tackles on the night. Seemed like every time we turned around, Rondé Barber was talking about KJ Britt, as well as this other guy, Cam Gill. Finished with 2 tackles, 1.5 sacks. He had relentless pressure throughout the night. He was able to close out the deal twice, but he looked really, really sharp and really crisp. Gives you a little bit of hope, a little bit of optimism that if something happens to Levante David, if something happens to Devin White, obviously you don't want that to occur, but KJ Britt can step in and he can fill a void. Cam Gill, he can step in and be a pass rusher. Servassier Dennis, before he left with what looked like cramps, seems like he's going to be all right and everything's going to be good with him. Seemed like, he was going to be able to fill some shoes as well when the opportunity presented itself. Didn't pop off the screen the way that I was hoping to see him. He was one of the players that David and I had an eye out for because we had seen the way he popped off the screen with Pitt. That time will come. Again, for a lot of these rookies, a lot of these young guys, the game has to slow down a little bit. They're not used to this level and this pace of play. Let the game slow down. Come to them a little bit. Servassier Dennis is going to be just fine. But KJ Britt, Cam Gill, absolutely outstanding nights for both of them. Trey Palmer, I already talked about that touchdown catch of his. He finished with 4 receptions on 4 targets for 33 yards. He is not going away quietly in this wide receiver battle. Got the opportunity on kickoff returns. They were okay. I saw some people on Twitter talking about the Bucs need to do more fair catches. No, this is not the time for fair catches. These guys are trying to make a roster. as wide receivers and return men, they want the opportunity to show what they can do. You're not going to show anything if you're just fair catching the ball all the time. They want to be able to return these kicks, return these punts, and maybe make a huge play to either score or at least set up the offense with great field position. Trey Palmer, really good night. And then David Moore. David Moore is also part of this wide receiver competition. He's familiar with Dave Canales, what he did in Seattle, what the Seattle Seahawks did. He finished as the Buccaneers' leading receiver, 3 receptions, 4 targets, 66 yards. Really good night from him. Let's talk about the bat a little bit. Luke Goedeke, my goodness. Goedeke started off pretty well. Baker had time in the pocket. He was able to move around a little bit. He was able to do some things. And the more Goedeke stayed on the field, the worse that performance got. By the time Kyle Trask was in the game, Goedeke was a turnstile. There's no other way to put it. Really, really rough night for Luke Goedeke. It does not give me a whole lot of confidence in the right side of the offensive line if that's the way that Goedeke is going to play football. Keyshawn Vaughn, I kind of mentioned him when I was talking about what a good night Chase Edmonds had. Dude, you finally got your chance to step in and get a solid share of the running back snaps, and you finish with 7 carries for 4 yards. That's not going to get the job done. And if Sean Tucker starts to really move in an upwards trajectory, Keyshawn Vaughn could be in trouble of not making this football team at all. And then Cody Mauch. Overall, I thought Mauch was okay, but you can tell he's struggling, much like I mentioned with Servassier Dennis, with the speed of the game. He had 2 really costly penalties for the Buccaneers while he was on the field. Can't have that. He'll get used to it. He'll get more comfortable. His performance is likely going to improve once Ryan Jensen is a mainstay at center. Robert Hainsey, I like him. He's one of the nicest guys on the team. I root for him, but he has his ups and downs. There's no question about it. He is not Ryan Jensen. So the addition of Ryan Jensen to the offensive line is going to help Cody Mauch, but he and Luke Goedeke need to step their game up in a very, very big way. What we saw with Kyle Trask at quarterback, and maybe it had something to do with things that Baker was pointing out, calling out. I'm not sure. I'm not going to put that on Kyle, but the way they performed on the right side of the line when Kyle Trask was in at quarterback did not do Trask any favors at all in this competition. And then finally, my Jekyll and Hyde player of the game. You know him. You love him. Zion McCollum. Zion had a couple of snaps of really, really solid, good coverage, made a fantastic interception on great coverage, but he was also responsible for 2 of the touchdowns that the Pittsburgh Steelers scored. George Pickens absolutely roasted him on a 33-yard touchdown catch and run. And then Zion McCollum was supposed to have contained on Anthony McFarland's rushing touchdown. Instead, Zion cuts inside. He doesn't stay outside. It's a clear rushing lane and a touchdown for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can't have it. Zion McCollum, I realize he's a young guy. He is only in his 2nd year. This is an incredibly difficult defense to master and to understand, and he's going to have his growing pains. But you cannot be the guy on the field responsible for giving up 2 touchdowns. That is the difference between a win and a loss. Can't have it. David has talked about on this show that it really takes about 3 years for a corner to fully adapt to the NFL game. Obviously, it's going to be different for a lot of players. You can sit there and say, oh, it didn't take Sauce Gardner 3 years. No, but Sauce is a different breed. Zion McCollum is not Sauce. He is not Darrelle Revis. He is not, these guys that are coming in that are immediately being projected as being all pros, Pro Bowlers, potential Hall of Famers. This is a guy that was taken in the middle rounds of the draft, and he needs to continue to develop, but he cannot have those kinds of mental mistakes that cost the defense in ways that the opposing team is putting up points. You can't have it. Zion, got to tighten it up, bud. We're rooting for you here on the Locked On Bucs podcast, but got to see a better game out of you against the New York Jets. Finally, the most disturbing thing about Friday night's game that absolutely cannot be allowed to continue. That's next. here on Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on a preseason post-game reaction episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Our everydayers know what I'm about to say. For those of you new to the podcast, if you go back and listen to, I don't know, probably 15 of the 18 post-game reaction episodes that I did, or you go back and you read any one of the pick sixes that I dropped the morning after a Buccaneers game, you will see that this was a growing and seemingly never-ending trend from last season, and it reared its ugly head again Friday night. For the love of everything that is holy, knock it off with the stupid, avoidable penalties. What we saw last night from this Bucs team, and yes, it's preseason. I know that. I understand that. That's why this needs to be nipped in the bud right now. But what we saw from this Buccaneers team on Friday night was inexcusable. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, inexcusable. The very opening drive, I called for it on Friday's episode, Thursday night's episode, whenever you were able to catch it, that I wanted to see this team be aggressive. If you have fourth down situations, I want to see you go for it, because you're going to face those situations in the regular season, and it's a good opportunity for you to be able to try some things out. Opening drive, they run the ball 3 straight times, set up 4th and 1. Looked like they were going to run it again, and they were going to convert and be 1 for 1 on 4th downs. And Cody Mauch gets a false start. Can't have it. A great pass to Trey Palmer for an explosive play, called back for offensive pass interference. Can't have it. There was a corner, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, got called for a defensive pass interference. It was a ticky-tack call. I will give you that. But don't give the referees the opportunity to call it on you. You can't have it, and it set Pittsburgh up in scoring position. I believe they got a field goal out of that drive. The Buccaneers finished with 12 penalties for 127 yards, compared to the Steelers' 6 penalties for 46 yards. For those of you keeping track at home, that is double the amount of penalties for almost triple the amount of penalty yards. That will cost you football games. The Buccaneers do not have Tom Brady under center to overcome those penalties on a 2-minute game-winning drive. They don't have it. Not saying that Baker can't orchestrate a game-winning drive. I'm not saying that Kyle can't orchestrate a game-winning drive. But last year, the 8-9 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the one the NFC South, needed multiple game-winning drives with under 5 minutes to play in the fourth quarter, because all they did leading up to that point was shoot themselves in the foot with bad decisions and bad penalties. Cannot have it. They went 0 for 2 on 4th down. I like the aggressiveness. There was zero execution. I just threw my pen. I'm so frustrated with all these penalties. Might as well painted my pen yellow and called it on a Buccaneer, because it was abysmal. And this goes to a lack of discipline, a lack of concentration, and the leaders on this football team, the Devin Whites, the Levante Davids, the Tristan Wirfses, the Baker Mayfields, the Mike Evanses, the Chris Godwins, they have to step up, because there's no more Tom Brady here to get in these offensive linemen's faces and chew them out and hold them accountable. There's no more Ndamukong Suh to get in the faces of the defensive linemen and hold them accountable. Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, both of you have talked about being leaders, taking on a larger leadership role. You got to get in the faces of Zion McCollum and the other members of the secondary who are giving up plays, who are not staying in their assignments, who are committing stupid penalties. This is where the leadership of the football team, you can't put it all on Todd Bowles. The leaders on this roster have to hold the other players accountable so that 12 penalties for 127 yards doesn't happen against the Minnesota Vikings, doesn't happen in the Superdome against the New Orleans Saints, doesn't happen late in the season against the Atlanta Falcons when a playoff berth could be on the line. The Buccaneers they are not a good enough football team to cost themselves over 100 yards in penalties and still find a way to win. They're not that team anymore. They are a talented football team. There's a lot of talent. There's all pro players. There's Pro Bowl players. There's future Hall of Famers. But as a whole, with the offensive line question marks, with the questions surrounding quarterback, with the questions surrounding tight end and running back, with the questions along your pass rush when your nose tackle was the leading sacker on your team, they cannot afford to cost themselves anything. They have to make the opposition earn every single inch and every single play. The opposing team is not earning squat when you are handing them numerous free first downs all game long. When you are costing yourself first downs and killing drives and giving the ball back to your opponent. That's not making them earn it. That's you giving it to them. So I'll tell you right now, before we even get to the Jets preview, what I'm looking for, clean up that crap. Clean up those mental mistakes. Do not make me come back on here and talk about having double-digit penalties for triple penalty yards. Cannot have it. And I know a lot of you feel the same. If you think I'm wrong, feel free to let me know in the YouTube comments, but I would be shocked to see anybody defending all the penalties that the Buccaneers had on Friday night. I know I'm right. David knows I'm right. You all know I'm right. They got to clean it up, and we're going to have to keep an eye on that against the New York Jets coming up next week. With that, I'm going to bid you all a fair adieu. I want to thank you all again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. For our everydayers, make sure you're coming back tomorrow. David will have plenty to say about this game. And of course, we got to talk about that quarterback news that I didn't talk about on this one. Some of you may know, some of you may not, but it's a discussion that we have to have. Any other questions, comments, reactions at all, drop them in the YouTube comments or email us at lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com. You can DM us as well on Twitter at Locked On Bucs. I know we got a post-game reaction email. Going to save that for tomorrow's episode when David is back. We can both react to it, but I know we do have some in the inbox as we speak. Check out everything that I'm doing over at bucksnation.com. And of course, follow everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JArco_Bucs, and follow David at DHarrison82. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.